Welcome to Fantastic Stories. When politicians talk about aliens. Recently, former US President Barack Obama mentioned and identified aerial phenomena and aliens. The aliens are real, he said, and added that he hasn't seen them and that they are not being kept in Area 51, unless there's a conspiracy and presidents are simply not being informed. Headlines reacted immediately. If we look at what he actually said, his position is consistent with what he has said before, as he acknowledged that military sensors have recorded objects that are not fully explained, while also clearly stating that he has not seen evidence of extraterrestrial beings. When someone with this level of recognition mentions aliens, the line between humor and seriousness easily becomes blurred, and later he clarified that his statement was a general reference to the statistical probability of life elsewhere in the universe. But that distinction matters. 2 days later, President Donald Trump joked that former President Obama may have revealed classified information which he shouldn't have revealed, and he also suggested that he had access to classified material and might soon release some information about UAPs. Parts of the UFO-UAP community began to celebrate, but one needs to remain cautious, because this is not new rhetoric, and US presidents periodically imply that they know more than the public. Just yesterday, the US Department of War began releasing a new series of declassified UAP materials, including military footage, historical reports, pilot testimonies, and even archival astronauts' recordings. According to official statements, this is intended to be only the first phase of a larger release. Initial reactions from prominent UAP commentators have also been relatively cautious. Investigative journalist Ross Coulthard and former intelligence official Lou Elizondo described the release as somewhat underwhelming, noting that many observers expected higher quality military footage and the previously discussed set of 46 additional UAP videos, which have not yet been published. At the same time, both suggested that this may represent only the beginning of a broader disclosure process, while also raising questions about how much information may still remain classified within institutions such as the Pentagon, NASA, or intelligence agencies. However, what is changing now is not just individual statements, but the number of politicians speaking openly about the topic. For example, US Representative Anna Paulina Luna has stated that she believes some UAPs may not be extraterrestrial, but rather interdimensional, describing them as entities that could operate outside of what we currently understand as space and time. She claims that her views are based on classified briefings and materials she has reviewed, and she has also suggested possible connections between modern sightings and ancient texts such as the Book of Enoch. Similarly, Representative Tim Burchett has made a series of unusually strong statements, claiming that some of the information he has seen in classified briefings would keep people up at night, and even suggested that public disclosure could cause serious societal disruption. He has also expressed concern for his personal safety, noting that he receives threats and that he may be poking the hornet's nest. At the same time, Vice President J.D. Vance has approached the topic from a very different perspective, suggesting in public interview that these phenomena might not be extraterrestrial at all, but could be interpreted through a spiritual or religious framework, even referring to them as demons, while still stating that he intends to investigate the issue further using his access to classified information. Taken together, these statements differ significantly in interpretation, interdimensional, technological, or even spiritual, yet they share one important feature: they all treat the phenomenon as real and worth discussing. Historically, this pattern also persists, as Jimmy Carter reported a UFO sighting before his presidency, and John F. Kennedy showed strong interest in space, intelligence transparency, and aerial surveillance during the Cold War. So political engagement with UFO topics is not unprecedented. And this is not exclusively an American phenomenon, as former Canadian Defense Minister Paul Hellyer publicly claimed that extraterrestrials have visited Earth, and in Russia, former President Dmitry Medvedev once joked that Russian presidents receive a secret dossier about aliens. Whether serious or humorous, such remarks demonstrate that the topic appears in political discourse across different countries. What is interesting is that this growing political openness is now being accompanied by actual document releases, and although the newly published materials do not appear fundamentally different from earlier military UAP footage, they do provide additional raw data for public analysis and discussion. What is new, however, is the intensity and frequency of these statements, as well as the environment in which they are spread and received, because in a culture of instant reactions, social media amplifies fragments, headlines remove context, and ambiguous statements become definitive claims within hours. This raises an important question: why are so many politicians speaking about this now? One possible explanation is increased access to information, as more lawmakers are being briefed on UAP-related material. Another possibility is a gradual shift towards transparency, and recent events seem to support this possibility, as governments are no longer discussing the phenomena exclusively behind closed doors, but are increasingly releasing raw materials and historical records into the public domain. And a third, more speculative interpretation is that these statements might be preparing the public for some form of future disclosure. At this stage, however, none of these explanations is confirmed. At the same time, officials connected to the release continue to emphasize that the materials do not constitute definitive evidence of extraterrestrial life. So let us separate the key concepts clearly. Unidentified aerial phenomena means observed objects for which there is currently no confirmed explanation. And it does not mean extraterrestrial technology or aliens, as those are logically different categories. Now, let us consider a hypothetical scenario in which a sitting US president explicitly states that extraterrestrial intelligent beings are present on Earth. What would follow? First, there would be institutional credibility shock, because if such evidence exists, one would ask why it was not published through scientific channels, and why secrecy has been maintained. Second, there would be an immediate restructuring of research priorities, as agencies such as NASA and ESA would face rapid pressure to provide answers. Current astrobiology focuses mainly on microbial life, biosignatures, atmospheric chemistry, and exoplanet habitability, and thus it assumes that life is distant and probably difficult to detect. Confirmed non-human intelligence would completely change the hierarchy of questions, so that the main issue would no longer be whether life is common in the universe, but rather how we interact with a technological or otherwise non-human agent. That would likely produce massive funding shifts and reclassification of priorities, as well as international negotiations concerning ethical frameworks of such interaction. This would be a cultural and structural transformation. Now consider the more realistic scenario, in which politicians continue to acknowledge unexplained objects, avoid claiming extraterrestrial origin, and gradually increase transparency. What changes then is primarily stigma reduction, as researchers can study anomalous sensor data without immediate reputational damage, and the topic slowly becomes a technical issue rather than a fringe one. We may already be approaching this phase, given that several serious scientists, such as Gary Nolan, Diana Pasulka, Avi Loeb, and Beatrice Volorel, investigate related questions openly, and recent publications have entered academic discourse. There is also a political communication aspect, as leaders sometimes speak in ambiguous terms because ambiguity maintains public interest without committing to a claim. Globally, no head of state has formally confirmed extraterrestrial presence, although governments do acknowledge anomalous observations. So the key distinction persists. Acknowledging unidentified data is not the same as confirming alien intelligence, and unexplained does not equal extraterrestrial. Therefore, the current situation is the following. Sensors record anomalies, Some cases remain unresolved, and witnesses and experiencers report their claims, sometimes showing signs of psychological trauma and sometimes describing peaceful encounters. And with additional military footage and documents now entering the public domain almost in real time, the distinction between data, interpretation, and speculation may become increasingly important. If disclosure ever happens, it will not be subtle, and it will inevitably lead to one key question: are we safe? And this would likely involve international scientific collaboration and military involvement. Until then, the rational position is to remain open, yet avoid premature conclusions. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, consider subscribing to my channel. Have a great day and see you next time.